Hey, I wanted to mention to you something I forgot when I was talking about the 21 days of prayer. I can't believe I forgot this. Sometimes it is so helpful for our prayer lives, and especially if we're doing something spiritually, when other people are doing it with us, we get encouraged by that. We get strengthened by that. And so we're going to have two corporate prayer meetings a week. One for the morning people. And if you're not a morning person, man, give it a shot. 6:30 Tuesday morning right here. It's a great time. No, don't be, man, I just convinced Jesus was a morning person. So, if you want to be like Jesus, all right, that's a little too much guilt. All right. Tuesday morning, 6:30 to 7, gets you enough chance to get off to work and do all that sort of stuff. We'll be right here just for a half an hour. I know when I pray with people, I get insights into things. Man, people are praying for stuff I never thought to pray for that. And then I hear people praying, and I go, man, I'm going to add that to my prayer life, and that's great. So do that. And then also, because I'm also convinced Jesus was a night person. So, I know. I think he was an all-day person. But on Tuesday nights as well, from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. We're going to have a time in here with a little bit of just some quiet worship as well, just to spend time praying together and gaining energy from each other and encouragement from each other. So for the next 3 Tuesday mornings and Tuesday nights, and Tuesday mornings 6:30 to 7, and then Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8, come and join us for prayer and seeking after the Lord together as a church body. So that's two mornings from now, and then 2 nights from now. So, Tuesdays. Hey, all right. Now I got to switch gears. Switching gears, this month we are having, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking in our service about our church's vision and our church's values. And what they mean to us, and what that looks like as we live out that vision, as we live out those values. The vision for our church is that we are a community that lives and loves like Jesus. A community that lives and loves like Jesus. And you look at that statement and you say, that's who we are. And then, because that's a high standard, isn't it? Whenever we say, man, we're going to live like Jesus and we're going to love like Jesus, that's an incredibly high standard. But it's what God's called us to. And we can't settle for anything less than that. And so we want to look at what it looks like to be a community, a unity of people who are together living and loving like Jesus would live and love. And in order to do that, there's 4 ways that we're going to look at for the next 4 weeks, one each week, that kind of our values, what it looks like. If we're to live and love like Jesus, then we can do it these 4 ways. And if we begin to live out these 4 values, we will be that community that lives and loves like Jesus. So I'm excited to talk to you about this as we begin the new year, to begin with this vision and encapsulating that for us and talking about that. And hopefully it's something that you're excited about, because it's something that's going to be changing your life. It's a transformative type of vision for each of us, for our church and for us individually. So if we are to be a community that lives and loves like Jesus, that we need to be a community, and here's the first core value we have as a church, and that's this, that we are a community that glorifies God. We're glorifying God. Now, we talk about that, and if you've been around Christian circles or walked in many churches for a while, you've heard the expression, man, we just want to glorify God. We're glorifying God in this. All glory to God. And you go, what does that mean? What does that even look like? We say those words, but what does that mean? What does that look like? There's got to be some practical ways that we can live and work that out. And in order for us to understand that, I want us to understand a little bit about the glory of God first. See, we serve a God that is glorious, and we see that several different ways. Theologians would talk about general revelation and special revelation. General revelation is the kind of revelation where it's accessible to all people, and it shows kind of a limited view of God, if you will. And creation is one of the main ways that God reveals himself. A couple of verses of Scripture. One is Psalm 19:1. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." In other words, the Bible is saying when you look at the heavens, when you look at the sky, you can see the creation, the order, the design of God. When we look at all this earth and this creation, we see not just the creation, but we see that there is a creator. Romans 1:20 says this, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." As we look at that verse, it's telling us something about the revelation of God. It's saying that there's invisible attributes of God, that as we look at nature, as we look at creation, we actually get to see a glimpse of God. And there's two things in particular. It says his divine nature is one of the things that we see. When we look at creation, we see plants and trees and animals and all sorts of things. We see created physical things. And we know that these things exist in time and in space. But as we look at the order of all that, we say and if we're honest, and we don't come at those observations with a bias against prior to it, we can see that there is design and that there's order. And because there's design and order, it must have been designed by someone. Things just don't happen like this. It just doesn't just go boom and it's created, or it's made, or it's evolved. But that we believe that, and if we're honest and we look at creation, God says if you look at it, you can see that there is a creator. There is a designer. And it says his divine nature. In other words, when it says that we can see God's divine nature through creation, is we can see that there is a creator who exists outside of creation, who made it all. So we look at nature and we look at creation, we go, there is a God, there is a creator who exists outside of this creation. We can see that from creation. That's one of the glimpses we get of God. The other glimpse we get of God is his eternal power. If somebody can create this, if there's a God that has created this, this must be a God who is extremely powerful to have created all the things that we see in this universe in which we exist. So in creation, we can see those two things. We can see that there is a God who exists outside of creation, who's created it, and that he is incredibly powerful. That's what Romans 1:20 is saying. And that through nature, we have this revelation of God. And from there we can go, if there's a God who exists outside of creation, who made all this, he must be incredibly powerful, and he must have some sort of glory associated with him. So that's what we understand from creation, that there is a designer about it. And the designer of the natural world made this world for a purpose. He made it so that it would glorify him. That's what our previous verse said in Psalm 19:1, that this universe and this world would bring him glory. Now, when we talk about when we talk about nature giving God glory, or us giving God glory, what I don't want us to think about is that nature can, by its existence, add glory to God, or give God something that he doesn't already possess. God is glorious. Beyond our whatever we could imagine or ever think, God is a God who is glorious and full of glory. Then there is no lack of glory in him. So when we say we're going to give God glory, it's not that we say, God, you're not glorious enough, and so I'm going to do something to make you more glorious. We can't add to his glory, but we can reveal the glory of God. We can expose the glory of God. We can let his glory shine and be seen. So when we give God glory, we're not adding to his glory. We're not giving God something that he doesn't already possess, but we're actually just revealing something and making it seen and making it known. So The natural world gives glory to God just by the fact that it is creation. And we can see that there's a God that exists outside of creation, that He's powerful, and there must be some glory associated with that. But we needed to see more of God, and God wanted us to see more of Him. He wanted a greater revelation than just nature, than just creation. Because, see, we can know that there is a God through creation, but we can't know God. It's one thing to know there is a God, but it's another thing to know God. And that's what He wants. And He wants us to know Him. So He wasn't just content to let us know a little bit about Him. There had to be a greater revelation and communication. And in Jesus, we see the greater revelation and communication. In John 1, verse 18, it says this: "No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made Him known." No one's ever seen God in heaven, but then it says but then it says He has made Him known. That is, Jesus has made Him known. So when Jesus came onto this earth in body, we got a fuller revelation of who God is. Jesus is God in the flesh. That's why we talk so much about Christ. That's why when we say we want to live and love like Jesus, we're saying we want to be able to live and love like the one who is God, the God who loves us. We want to live and love like He would want us to live, and like how we saw Him live when He was here on earth. There's some things we know about this God and what Jesus fuller revealed about the Father. One of the things we know is John 1:14. John 1:14 is this: "And the word is another word for Jesus. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Through Jesus, we see the glory of the Father. And when we see the glory of the Father, what we see is that He's full of grace and truth. That's something we don't know through just looking at the sky and looking at creation. We don't know about God. We don't know more about Him, that He is a God who is full of grace and truth. See, we don't have a God that just simply created this world, left it spinning, saw the humans down there messing up and went, "Oh, I'm so tired of them," and left. Just kind of took His hands off and said, "Okay, that's enough." What we learn through Jesus is that we have a God who created this universe, created us, and loved us so much, was so full of grace and truth, that He wanted us to know His truth, and He wanted us to experience His grace. And so He sent His Son here so that we would know that, so that we would understand more about His heart for us, that the God who created didn't just leave, but He is intimately involved in our lives. He didn't just create, but He sustains life, and He loves us and desires relationship with us. That's something we would have never known as we have just looked at the stars and looked at creation. We wouldn't have known that this God that exists outside of creation, that is all-powerful and full of glory, desires and loves us. That's a beautiful thing that we saw through Jesus. There's some other times that we see in Jesus' life how He chose to glorify the Father. Look at John 17, verse 1. It said, "When Jesus had spoken these words, He lifted up His eyes to heaven and said, 'Father, the hour has come.'" What hour is He referring to? He's referring to the hour of His trial and crucifixion. He said, "The hour has come here that what I came to do, to die for these people so that they would know your love, could be reconciled to you. The hour's come. Here it is. I'm on the threshold of this very painful experience. The very reason I came, I'm on the threshold. I'm standing here." And He says, "Father, glorify your Son, that the Son may be glorified in you." He said, "I want glory. I want the glory of the Father to shine through." Look at John 13:31. He says, "When He had gone out, Jesus said, 'How is the Son of Man glorified? and God is glorified in him. Again, this theme where Jesus wants the Father to be glorified in him continues to resonate through him. I want to read one more passage of Scripture, John chapter 12, verses 27 through 30. Now, listen to these words. He says, "Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour." Again, the same hour. The hour that he's anticipating of his trial and his crucifixion. "Shall I say, Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I've come to this hour." Why would I say, God, save me? This is the purpose I came. I really, and I hopefully we can see the struggle in his mind because he knows what's coming. And man, if that was you and I, would we be full of dread? And can't even imagine. But at the same time, he says, I'm full of dread and all that over here. But at the same time, I stand firm in the purpose. This is the hour I came. Father, glorify your name. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. He's saying, listen, I have glorified my name in your life so far, and I'm going to glorify it even more in your death and resurrection. It says the crowd that stood there and heard it said that it had thunders. Others said an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered, this voice has come for your sake, not mine. That he came to this hour and he said, Father, glorify yourself in my life in this hour, because this is the purpose for which I came. If we are to live and love like Jesus, Jesus was about glorifying the Father. And so we need to understand something about that verse that we just dug into right there, that reveals to us how we can glorify the Father. And if we're to live for the glory of God, and we're to live like Jesus did, there's a few ways that we can live to glorify God. And here's the first one, is that Jesus glorified the Father by recognizing this as his purpose. He said, this is the purpose I came. So if we want to glorify God in our lives, how are we to do it? We are to recognize that living for the glory of God is our purpose. Purpose. Wow. As we think about what's my purpose in life, that's a big question. It's a huge question to consider. What is my purpose in life? And a lot of us, we think through that, man, when we're young and when we're in our teens and in our 20s, we're thinking, man, what am I going to do with my life? What's my purpose? Why am I here? And I know those 20-year-old years can be full of anxiety and fear and dread and just like, I don't know what I'm doing in this life. And we try to think, what is it that God would have me to do? And when I think about all the things there are to do, when I think about all the ways that everybody's been gifted, man, people are gifted to do all sorts of things. God called me to be a pastor, and in pastoring, he said, I want you to glorify God. Others of you, he's called to work in the medical field. And if you're called to be a nurse, and that's great. God wants you to be a nurse and help people get better and feel better and do all the things you do in the hospital. But that's not your purpose. It's your vocation, but it's not your purpose. Your vocation is being a nurse. Your purpose is the glory of God. That people would see God in you. That just as nature reveals or gives us a glimpse into the glory of God and who He is, our lives should give people a glimpse. It should reveal who God is. Maybe God's called you to be good with numbers, and He's called you to be an accountant. Well, that's your vocation, but your purpose is to glorify God. Maybe God's called you to be a plumber and to fix pipes and do all that stuff. And man, that is your vocation, but your purpose is to glorify God. Maybe God has called you to work in retail, to be a server in a restaurant and to serve food. And man, get that food out there and do it well, but do it to the glory of God, because there's a difference between your vocation and your purpose. And I want to say to you today that God has created you for the purpose of His glory. God has created you for the purpose of His glory. You see, I don't want people to see me. I don't want people to see how good I am. Because they're not going to see good. If what you see in me, if you just saw me, you'd see bad. You'd see selfish, you'd see arrogant, you'd see angry, you'd see all sorts of things that don't look like God. But when I live for the glory of God, I've resolved and am intentional in the purpose and intent that my purpose in life is to glorify God. And so I let God shine through in my life. I let God see me. And I let people see me and see God in me. See, without intention, all the world will see is us. But with intention, they begin to see God. You know, and maybe it's one of the most obvious circumstances, but when you go to a restaurant and you order your food, there's a nice waitress or a waiter that sits there and stands there and takes your order, and they take your order, and then the food comes, and that waiter or waitress sees you pray. And I always think, man, they're watching me pray. And so now, everything else I do is on display while I'm eating. How I treat the person across from me while we're eating. How when they come and say, is everything all right? I can treat them really nicely and kindly, or I can say, yeah, I can be mean to them or whatever. But everything I do is on display, but not display as just a random customer in a restaurant, but as a follower of Jesus Christ. Because by praying in public, I've declared I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and so now He's on display. What are they seeing about Jesus in my life? What are they seeing about how transformative it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ when they look at how much I tipped him? How do we treat, if you're a boss and you have employees, how do you treat them? Do they see the glory of God? Do they see it that there is a powerful God in your life, and they see the power of God in your life because they see that you are not the same as everyone else, that you are different, that you have integrity, that you have kindness, that you have grace. And when they see that, they're not seeing you, they're seeing God in you. You are stripping away everything that's sinful you and allowing God to shine through your attitudes and your words and your life and your behavior and your choices and your values. We have to be intentional about this. We have to be intentional that now our lives no longer are about us. If we are to glorify God, listen to this. Because I think it's key to us understanding the glory of God and what it means to glorify Him. When we live for the glory of God, we no longer live so others will see us, or even so that God sees us. We live so that God can be seen. To glorify God, we do not live so that others will see us. We do not live even so God will see us. We live so that God will be seen. You see, if I live so others will see me, then I'm living for my glory. I'm living for my applause, for my acclaim, for people to think that I'm great. If I'm living for God to see me, hey, God already sees you. You don't have to put on a show for God. You can't pretend. You can't be an actor and fool Him into thinking you're a better person than you are. You also don't want to be living so that God will see you in some senses, because then that translates into, well, if I'm good enough, if I do all the right things, then God will reward me. And I'm living for that reward. And all of a sudden, our living for the glory of God turns into selfish living once again, because we just simply want the reward. If we are to live for the glory of God, we are not living so others will see us or even so God will see us. We are living so God can be seen, because He is the only one worth seeing. I am not worth seeing. You are not worth seeing, eternally speaking. God is worth seeing. God is the one who is full of glory. He's the one who's the creator. He's the one who's the forgiver. He's the one who's full of grace and truth. He's the one that I want people to know. If we are to live and to love like Jesus, we live for the glory of God. We live so that God will be seen in and through our lives. When people see you, do they see you or do they see God? That's a sobering question for me, and I think for all of us, if we take in the gravity of that statement. Because it's reflected in what are my relationships like? What is my character like? What is my direction and purpose in life like? What everything. It changes everything about our lives. I want you to see that if we're to live and love like Jesus and live for the glory of God like Jesus, that we have to make it our intention and our purpose. We have to intentionally understand that that is our purpose, that God will be seen. But secondly, how Jesus lived for the glory of God. Not only did he intentionally make it his purpose, but he glorified the Father by listening closely to him. He glorified the Father by listening closely to him. He knew what the Father had for him to do. There wasn't a question. He knew that. He listened to the Father. He knew what his purpose was. He knew what this hour held for him. Do we listen closely to God? How are we going to glorify God if we don't know what he wants us to do? If we don't know the directions he wants us to take? If we can't. So are we those who listen closely to God? That's one of the reasons I want us to take part in this 21 days of prayer and fasting. It's a time to listen intently to God, to hear his direction, to hear his voice, to hear his whispers into our lives. And when we hear that, when we hear his direction, we hear his voice, then we can follow it. Then we can glorify him because we're in communication with him. A third way is this: Jesus glorified the Father by making it his purpose, by listening closely to the Father, and by submitting his life to the will of the Father. By being obedient to the Father. He pursued the Father's goals. When we talk about, like this year, each one reach one, right? That there's somebody within your circle of influence in your life who doesn't know Jesus, whose God is working on their heart already, and now he's just got to get you to listen to him so he can tell you who that person is, so you can start praying for him and start being intentional about telling that person about this God who is worthy to be seen. Because we want other people to see him. And having the intention and the purpose and the will to obey the Father and to listen to his voice and to have God shine through our lives in that way. And so he obeyed the Father. John 5:19 says, "So Jesus said to them, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing.'" And again, we see in that the intimate communication between the Father and the Son, don't we? That they're connected. They communicate to each other. And so he's constantly saying, "Father, what are you doing? And I want to join you. What are you doing? I want to join you." What is God doing in the lives of people around you? What is God doing in your life? See, God's working in the lives of people all around you. And are we attuned to that? Because if we see what God's doing, we can step in and minister the grace and the glory and reveal the glory of God in their life and say, God has something for you in that circumstance. What you're going through, I see it, and God sees it. And we minister to that need. What's God doing in your life? Every day there's something that goes on in your day that you didn't expect. Isn't there? God's in that. God's doing something. He wants to change you. He wants to communicate something to you in those moments. Continue to communicate with him, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. It's kind of, if we're trying to figure out what to do in life, and we don't know which way to go, what's the Father doing? I'll do that. I'll just default to that. Whatever he's doing, that's what I'm doing. That's an easy default. It's easy to understand. It's hard to accomplish. But whatever the Father's doing, okay, that's what I'll do. So we come to these things, and we've talked about this before, that when we have an obedience problem, we really have a love problem. When we're not following God, it's really that we don't love Him as we should. John 14:15 says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Break that down really simply for us. You see, everything we do either reveals or obscures the nature of God in our life. Everything you do, everything you say, every attitude you carry will either reveal or obscure the nature of God in your life. Even in the very mundane things, they have the potential to glorify God. I want us to look at one final verse today. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 10. We're going to start in 23 through 31. It's a little bit longer of a passage, but I want you to kind of walk this passage through with me. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 10. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. In other words, he's saying, look, there's a lot of things you could do in life, but not all of them are helpful for you, and not all things build you up in Christ and build you up to be a more godly person. He says, let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. So when I start to live, I'm not just living for myself, but I'm looking out for my neighbor and his spiritual good. He says, and now he's going to give us some instructions on something that was very relevant in their culture. It says, eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. See, there was some, if you walked into a meat market, there was some meat that had been sacrificed to idols. There was some meat that hadn't been sacrificed to idols. And it was this big controversy. If you're a follower of Jesus, can you eat meat in a market that had been previously sacrificed to an idol? And so there was this big debate going on in Christian circles, right? In the church at that time. And so he says, here's how you handle that. Go into the meat market, buy meat. Don't ask any questions, just buy it, right? Without raising any questions on the grounds. And why? He says in verse 26, he says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Everything comes from God. And you know, as a non-vegetarian, I'm really happy about that. I can eat all that meat. Just can't tell you how happy that makes me. So, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Everything comes from God. If you get something, enjoy it as a gift from God. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question. Again, don't ask questions when you go to the market. Don't ask questions if you get invited to somebody's house who doesn't know Jesus. Just eat what's before you. And don't raise the question, oh, is this? Oh, because I don't know. That's what he's saying. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then he says, then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you. Because remember, at the very beginning of this, what did he say? Do not live for your own good, but for the good of your neighbor. Right? So he said, you may know it's sacrificed to an idol, and you go, you know what? All those animals, God gave them to me to eat. And I can eat those, and I don't have any pang of conscience about it, but I don't live for myself. I'm watching out for my neighbor, and for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience if I partake with thankfulness? In other words, thankful that God has provided all this sort of stuff for me. Why am I denounced? Because of that which I give thanks. So, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Here's a very specific situation. It was just the whole meat sacrifice to idols. Should I not? I don't know, but I don't live for myself. I live for others, and I don't want to create anybody else any spiritual problems. And I'm at liberty to eat that stuff, but you know what? I'm not going to if it's going to cause you problems. Because I don't live for me, I live for that. And I'd much rather see you rightly related with God than me eat barbecue. That's what the issue is. And so we look at situations like this. Eating. You can eat to the glory of God? Yes, you can. You can eat to the glory of God. You know what? You can do your work to the glory of God. Whatever you do, you can do that for the glory of God. Do you realize that your marriage was designed to glorify God? Be married to the glory of God if you're married. So that the glory of God is not obscured by your marriage, but the glory of God is revealed by your marriage, by the grace and the love and the deference that you show to your spouse, by how you speak to them and about them in public, by how you serve them. And we do it because we love our spouses and all that, but we do it why? Ultimately, so that God can be seen. We want the world to know that God can not only change our lives and transform them, but He can change and transform marriages. Marriages in the church, but also in the world, are in trouble. And people need hope for their marriages. They need to know that there is a way that their marriage can survive and not just be okay, but be great. And they can be great through the transformative power of God in your marriage. You can spend money to the glory of God, or you can spend it for yourself. But how you spend your money is a reflection of the glory of God. It's a reflection of the value and worth that you place in Him. If all your finances go towards you and all your pleasures and all your wants and all your desires, and they selfishly serve, but they never look out for others and give for the benefit of others, we don't obey God in the principle of tithing, then our use of finances doesn't glorify God. A few weeks ago, we did a sermon on giving and tithing, and we talked about that principle. And at the end of it, I asked if there were people who weren't already willing to be a percentage giver, and if those who are already percentage givers would be willing to increase the percentage of their giving. And people turned in cards. We had 23 individuals or families say, you know what? I'm not a percentage giver, but that's what God's calling me to do in the new year. And some of those said that, and others of them said, I'm going to increase the percentage of my giving. So I want to encourage you, if you are one of those 23 individuals or families, that is something, as you do that you're doing that in obedience to the Lord, and your giving then reflects and reveals the glory of God. Our giving, our marriages, how we work, how we live in our neighborhoods, how we treat our children reveals or obscures the glory of God. What is your life doing? Is it revealing or obscuring the glory of God? Listen, if we are to live for the glory of God, I'm going to say it one more time. We no longer live so others will see us, or even so that God will see us. We live so that God can be seen. Have you seen God? If you've seen God, you know how beautiful and glorious and wonderful He is. Have you ever seen something just so amazing, you're just like looking for somebody else to share it with? You're like, man, there's got to be some. Does somebody else seeing this? Because I remember it was just last week, there was this amazing sunset. And I went, that is so beautiful. Look at that. I'm seeing this right now. That's amazing. And I ran in the house and I said, Jenny, have you seen this? And she had just been out for a walk and I hadn't thought about that, but she'd been outside the whole time. And she said, yeah, I've seen it. And I said, well, come out and see it again. This is beautiful. Because I wanted to share, the joy I was getting out of seeing that, I wanted to share that with someone because I saw it. If I didn't see it, I'd be like, somebody said there's a sunset out there. Oh, I bet it's nice. I'm not excited about that. I haven't seen it. But once you see it, you're like, I got to share that. My heart and my prayer for each one of us is that we would see. And once you've seen the glory and the beauty and the love of God in your life, you're going to be looking for people. Hey, have you seen my God? He is so beautiful. You've got to get out of your house. Come here. You have got to see how beautiful my God is. And then it's your mission and goal to find as many people as you can to see what you've seen. And when that's our heart, we're living for the glory of God. Does that make sense? I want you to see God. That's why I want you to so seriously take into consideration this 21 days of prayer and fasting. In that 21 days, I want you to see God. I want you to see how beautiful He is. Because once you do, you're going to tell everybody you know. Everybody. If we're to live and love like Jesus, we live to the glory of God. We live so that He can be seen.